All right, we're on the air. I will call to order the special meeting of the Board of Directors, United Laguna Woods Mutual. And we are in the community boardroom. It's 10 o'clock, and this is our annual budget meeting. Do we have press? I don't see her here. But of course, we're on television this morning. Everybody, please be on your best behavior. We are on television. And, but I don't see the Globe here yet, but she may be coming, or watching on TV, because I'm sure there'll be an article.
Yes, are we recording?
Yes.
That's what the little lights mean. All right, I need a motion to approve the agenda. All right, I have Sue.
Okay, I move that you approve the agenda.
Thank you, Manuel. So we have an approval of the agenda. Any objections? All right, without objection. Chair remarks. This is the culmination of a long process, and I hope all of our residents out there know that this isn't something that we put together willy-nilly at the last minute. We've been working on this for 3 months. What we do today is to present to you what our latest and greatest is. That does not mean that there might not be some changes depending on what we do today. But for the most part, this is pretty final, and we will vote on it in our September meeting. So this is the 28-day warning, if you will, that it will be voted on at our September meeting officially. I will go over real quickly, because it's a little bit different format than what we often do. We will have member comments, but those are only things that do not have to do with the budget. Anything that has to do with the budget is not, should not be done in member comments. We will have comments from the rest of the members later on when we go over the budget. Then we are going to have the review of the 2020 business plan and the budget with Jeff and Betty, and they're going to go through the whole thing and all of their slides. So if you have questions, please note the slide number and put your question down so that when they're finished, we can refer back to it. We're not going to stop in between. Board members will then have an opportunity to ask a question or make a comment. And then we will have member comments from the audience on the budget. And adjourn. Hopefully, maybe not quite as fast as Third did yesterday, although I'm sure other people would like. They got through in a little over an hour. So, all right, let's begin with member comments of anything that is not on the agenda. Christopher, do we have any speakers?
Yes, we have Jenny Firmer, and then after that is Mary Stone.
Good morning, Jenny Firmer, 881A, Mendoza. I do have some comments I want to make on the budget, but I'll wait for the time. I just want to make a general comment, especially regarding after the last meeting, and that is that members that I have spoke with, which is extensive in United, still would like to see the assessments come down and services approved. And I guess probably the main concern is everybody's still trying to figure out why the assessments have gone up so much. That's probably the confusion more than anything. And I'll just say that now. And then after the budget, I have some information I'd like to go over regarding some numbers that I looked at and just some suggestions.
Thank you. Mary?
Mary Stone, 356C. I guess there's two things that I'd like to mention. First of all, is that I recently talked to a real estate person who, when I was talking with her, says that she does not sell in United. So it kind of piqued my curiosity, so I went online to check out the difference between sales in United and in Third, and unfortunately, there was a stark difference. And when real estate people are not wanting to sell in United, I think we need to look into the problem. I think that's a problem that the board needs to address. I know in governing docs, we have been doing a number of things about guarantors and financial qualification policy and things like that, and maybe we're headed in the wrong direction. The other thing I want to talk about is there's one thing that we cannot beg, borrow, or steal, and that is time. And time is money. So I think that it's up to the members of the board to consider the amount of time that is wasted in needless conversations and debates and discussions and rehashes, and start thinking about saving time in meetings, in studies, and all of that. Time is money. Let's not waste it.
Thank you, Mary. Anyone else?
There are no more speakers at this time.
Okay. That's it. All right, I have to ask, are there any, yes, Cash?
I would like to ask Mary, did she ask that particular realtor what was her problem? Did she elaborate anything? Because I don't see that much difference between Third Mutual and us. It's there slightly, but we are a different. Yes.
Yeah,
I want to
this
talk
is not a discussion time. All right, are there any other comments on the member comments? Director Armendariz.
Regarding both the speakers' comments, I hope we can provide better information to all the members that are here as to perhaps other ways that we can try to reduce the assessment. As far as the sales, it is hard to understand because United is definitely a better deal economically. I think what one of the problems is that people are getting concerned about the amount of the annual cost because of the monthly assessments. They just keep going up, and up. And I know we have problems with the infrastructure, but we provide enough money for that. So I think that's one problem that we need to try to solve internally.
Thank you. Anybody else? Sue, did you have your hand up? No. All right. Andre?
Thanks for Mary's comment. I received quite a few real estate agents talking about that they don't want to sell United because there's too much regulation and too restricted for buyers. Buyers look at the requirement and say, okay, I'm going to Third. And that's what their response at this point. And we brought up this issue several times. But the answer was Third was newer, and Third has $1 million houses, so it's different. But you know, I've had friends that purchased the Third, and they look at it and say the same unit they're looking at, United is much lower than Third, and they prefer to buy Third. So that's a big warning sign that tells us that there's some issues that we need to consider. Okay, we can talk about that maybe in one of the board committee meeting and see what we can do to improve our sales. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Maggie?
Thank you. I suppose no one recognizes the fact that Third's assessments are $30 higher every month and have been for years. There must be a reason for that. What is that? What is that Third raises their assessments by $30 over United's every year, every year? Are they such a good deal at that price if we're worried about assessments? Thank you.
Gary?
I guess I want to respond to the sales in United, and if realtors do not want to sell in United, then maybe United needs to hire someone that will handle the sales for United.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, let's get down to the business of the day. And I will turn this over to Jeff. Are you starting? And Betty? And as I say, we're going to go through their whole presentations. They have wonderful slides for us. And just make a note of which slides you had a question on so that when we get to comments, it'll be easier for us to refer back. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Madam President, to the board and to those in the audience. Good morning. It's a pleasure to present version 2 of our 2020 business plan. I have a couple of presentations. We're going to walk you through the budget, but before I get to the budget, I also wanted to present to kind of a recap of some of the really outstanding things that you've been working on because when you talk about it and relate to the budget, these are activities that you've approved. We continue to move forward on to make improvements to the area of United. Going to bring up the calendar real quick and show you kind of where we're at. Obviously, today is Friday, August 9th. We've had several meetings, starting with landscaping meetings and maintenance construction meetings, and then on July 11th, we had the first look at version 1. But I want to make sure that the residents here know that beyond that, there's been several meetings with regards to the staff working to develop various information assessments with regards to how to put the budget together, how we're doing, where we need to make cuts, where we need to make recommendations. So culmination of that, we even had a meeting yesterday, a short meeting to answer some of the questions that some of the board members had. Which has been really good, and so I want to, number one, thank the board members that have participated and worked with us so that we can present the best budget moving forward for you. With that, we'll walk into a couple of slides, and then I have some specific ones I wanted to talk about relative to where we're going. Relative to our mission statement and our budget highlights, just real quickly, our mission is to ensure that the Laguna Woods Village residents receive unparalleled opportunities to enjoy the utmost and active living here within the context of trying to develop a budget here. That is our goal, that is our mission. And then within that, we go to our next one, which is our strategic planning goals as ways of supporting that activity, highlighted by ensuring financial stability and longevity moving forward. Improving our customer service to meet our residents' needs and concerns. That is both external and internal. Attract and develop and retain high-quality staff, because the better staff we have, the more attentive staff we have, the better we can meet those first two goals. And then implement technology advances as we move forward, not only implementing them, by identifying what we need to do and to increase our technology to not only address efficiencies and needs of the residents, but also to address that first one, which is what kind of technology advances do we want to put in place that can help us ensure that financial stability and longevity. And then finally, talking about upgrades in our infrastructure. And so I'm now going to switch PowerPoints. I know we have two handouts. If you, there's a second handout which has on the second page has just a quote. The first one says budget priorities. If I can refer you to that. I'm going to walk through these real quick. They're not here to be a discussion point. Just wanted to go through a number of projects that you've been looking at. So again, this is a statement that I had made earlier. When we have a community at the age that we have, infrastructure becomes a very important and critical element of how we maintain this facility, how we maintain the village and keep it the way we want it to operate and provide services to the community. So I started with that little quote. But going into the PowerPoint, and I'm going to walk through them pretty quick, Chris, and he's kind of handling the controls there. So these are just some of the projects that you have approved and we're working on or are part of the 2020 budget too, but this goes back into this current year's budget and some of the key elements, just to remind you of the work activity that you have going. So one of them was the copper pipe remediation work that we're working on. The next one is our Pushmatic electrical panel replacement program that we've up to upgrade our panels in several locations of 162 panels to be precise, and with the estimation of 275 ultimately. The next one is our asphalt paving, parkway concrete and seal coat programs. Talk about this a lot because as we do seal coat and asphalt paving programs and maintain our infrastructure, we don't have to do major overlay programs, which are so much more expensive on a cost square foot basis. So the better we do with regards to maintaining our asphalt out there and our concrete, the less we're going to get into long-term big capital expenditures. Next one is our Parkway concrete program. Again, same concept here, improving and making repairs where necessary, making sure that we have less liability and that we're moving forward to ensure our long-term stability in that program. Again, same concept here in the seal coat. Don't belabor the point, but when we do seal coating gives the life of the asphalt out there a much longer lifespan and saves us from going back into the area and having to do a complete overlay, which is, like I said, many, many times more expensive than doing seal coats. Jumping over to some additional work that's been real important for us is the epoxy waistline remediation. A very important program for the United, trying to resolve backups that we've had related to compromised pipe systems out there. Just wanted to reiterate that this is a long-term program, obviously going out to 2025, and indicated there in 2019 alone, 144 buildings scheduled for epoxy lining, and waistline remediation was completed already on 53 of our buildings. Our next one that wanted to mention was our prior to paint. Again, the picture speaks 1,000 words in the sense that a big part of getting ready to paint and is to address dry rot repair issues, significant to our community. We're trying to get a handle on that, moving forward in a very diligent way with our maintenance and construction staff to implement a 10-year full cycle paint program. And in order to do that, we need to address the dry rot issues that are out there. Next, going forward, we have in areas enhancing, reinforcing safety and security. So walk through some of those real quickly. The first one is our Shepherd's Crook installation. As you know, that we're moving forward with the idea of replacing the barbed wire fencing throughout the village. And so this is an ongoing project. It's important. It's not only is it an aesthetic one, but it is also a security for our community. Then with the go to the gate access is in our RFID use. The new technology, the 9 gates, we're just about completed with all of them. Gate 4 is the only one that went working there, and that's really not that's an exit only, so not an RFID critical. This has been a very successful process. We have, I think, only 2,500, I think the last count, maybe less than that, maybe 2,000 vehicles and that haven't gotten their IFD. I mean, so just about, 80-90% of the people have done the RFID, which certainly helps clear the gates and more efficient with regards to creating safety out there too, knowing who's coming in and who's going out. Next slide. Our disaster preparedness, as you know, obviously we've had a couple of earthquakes in not too recent past. And so again, the disaster preparedness group and management-wise by Tim Moy continue to invest in priority areas, including the comprehensive code red alert program, generators that were in the Capitol, and resident education. Will continue to do that because I think that's a very important part of maintaining a feel of safety in our community and making sure that our residents know that we know how to address the issue when it comes forward. In the social services areas, we've updated our caregiver program in response to issues that have been addressed there. while making sure that our community has access to the services that they need. Next slide. Planning for the village's successful future. A few slides here. Irrigation control replacement. Investing in upgrading our technology here is real important, not only to save water, which is obviously more and more important, but water costs are going up, and so the more efficient that we can be in the use of our water, the more we can keep control of those costs that are going up by an outside agency that we don't control. And more importantly, just the efficiency for our landscaping operations. With that, we also are doing water efficient landscaping projects and programs. And again, this is to meet state mandated programs, but also really to be just more efficient with our water and our costs. And then another big area in the landscaping is we did a large testing program with regards to Roundup, came up with a alternative to Roundup, which is from a safety perspective and also from a landscaping perspective, doing the same amount of work, doing the same level that we want, but a safer alternative for our residents.
No, we'll have questions after they've finished their presentations. No.
So I'll jump back into now into version 2, back into our business plan. On page 5, or the PowerPoint 5. Give Chris time to get that back up there. This is an overall view, 2019 plan, the 2020 plan, the change that's being presented relative to the mutual. The 2020 proposed plan is $397.44, or an increase of $21.75. The GRF budget is $205.60, which is an increase in $2.77. So an overall change from the 2019 plan of $578.52 to $603.04. A increase or a change of $24.52. Again, these are the next slide. Go ahead. The next slide there shows you a comparison of the costs associated from year 2016 to the proposed 2020 estimated cost of $603.04. And the bar chart over there just gives you an idea of where your expenditures have gone from 2016 being proposed to 2020. Give you an overview of that. And with that, I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Betty and her presentation of the more detailed specifics of the 2020 plan. So thank you.
Right,
Good
before
morning.
we get to that, would everybody please turn off their cell phones? It's very disturbing when we get cell phones, whether they're chirping or ringing or whatever, so.
Good morning. We're just going to continue along in this presentation, focusing on the United specific budget. But first, we wanted to talk about a few things that have an overview for all the three entities, GRF, United, and Third. As you know, we have a shared staff, so we want to present to you the staffing levels that are used for VMS. And then, of course, your share represents the budget for the services that you receive. But on slide 7, we can see that we have full-time equivalents in this budget of 751. And as you know, we have a lot of part-time employees, both in security and recreation. And so we reduce all those hours down to a full-time equivalent. We used to call them staff years, so whatever term you like to hear, but it's the equivalent of a full-time person for the year. So we have 751 full-time equivalents. And back in 2011, we had 754. So you can see that we are at or just below the same staffing levels over the last 10 years. Looking by department then, we want to look at the proposed budget, starting with the Office of the CEO. And this is a staffing level of 10 full-time equivalents. and this is an increase of 1 compared to 2019. And so on all these slides, we're going to do a comparison now and focus on the primary reasons for change from 2019 to 2020. And in this area, we added a marketing content editor instead of some outsourced services for web design and editing. So this is a new staff member who is currently on staff, and the budget is catching up to those decisions that have been made earlier this year and including that as a budgeted position. In resident services, we're decreasing from 36 full-time equivalents down to 35. And this is due to the removal of a supervisory position that has been included in the budget for the last couple of years, but not filled. So that work has been absorbed by other employees, and so we were able to remove that from the budget. General services is a proposed budget of 91.57 full-time equivalents, and this is a reduction of 1.5 positions from the prior budget because of the reorganization. You may remember last year that we reorganized and eliminated the department head over landscape and the department head over general services, and instead we're operating with 2 senior managers that are reporting to the COO, who is the acting as the department head for those 2 areas. So this is the net result of those organizational changes, and you have a savings there. In landscape services, the budget is 149 positions, and that is an increase of 6.73. This is a correction to the budget. We had some turnover offsets and also some positions that were added last year that were not included in the budget. And so this is catching up to your current service levels and staffing levels in landscape. Broadband services and information services have no change. We have 23 positions in broadband and 10.5 in information services. Moving on to financial services, this is a budget proposed at 31 full-time equivalents, and this is an increase of 1 position that we've added to address our AR and internal controls. And so it's a managerial level position that will be able to take some of those responsibilities off the controller and have a better service level in AR collections and internal controls. Security services is a budget of almost 120 full-time equivalents, and that's a net increase of 1.5. This is due to an increase in, this area includes not just security operations, but also compliance and social services. And so 1 position in social services moved from a half-time to a full-time. I think it's called an intake coordinator. So there's a half a position increase in social services, and then the other position is a net increase in the security patrol officers. Our chief has been moving from part-time inspector positions to full-time security patrol officers and set up a schedule with a rotation that will be supported by this staffing level. In recreation services, we have an increase to 86.36 full-time equivalents. That's 1.25 positions, and that is primarily due to the addition of a pool specialist that was really moved from the M&C department. So we pulled that position out of M&C, added it to recreation for the support of the pools, and then the other quarter of a position is just adjustments in the part-time hours at the various facilities. Human resources has no change, remaining at a staffing level of 8.4, and maintenance and construction has an increase of 1, a net increase of 1 position to 186.5 full-time equivalents. And maintenance actually had 2 positions that were added and approved this year for an inspector 2 and an alterations coordinator. So that was offset by moving the 1 pool tech person over to recreation. So you see the net increase of 1 there. So that brings us down to the 751 full-time equivalents. So that is an increase in this proposed budget of 10 positions. The next slide shows a little more detail on your proposed budget, how we get to that $603.04 per manor per month. The first line represents revenues that are unique to United Mutual. These are fines, fees, and charges that help offset your costs. So we're able to lower your assessment in the amount of $17.50. So it's shown here as a positive number, but that actually reduces your assessment. And your total expenses below that on the second line are $252.92. That's an increase over the current year of $21.44. And I think it's important to note that on that line for your total operating expenses, you are right in line with Third's increase. Their increase was about $21.50 in the same category. So the resources that are needed to address your operations, that increased budget is just about the same. And then we look at your reserve contributions, which are on the fourth line. We're recommending that you go from $148 per manor per month to $152 per manor per month. That's a $4 increase. And then to offset some of those operating increases, we've reduced your contingency fund contribution from $15 to $10. That's a $5 reduction. And so the main difference you see between your budget and Third's is that they were able to take a larger decrease in their contingency fund. They have separate disaster fund that they have a very significant contribution towards each year. And so they were able to have more flexibility there. We felt comfortable with the $5 for you, but didn't want to go any lower than that, and we'll explain each of these funds later in the presentation. Added to that is your GRF assessment of $205.60. That's a $2.77 increase for GRF, or about 1.4%. So your total basic assessment shows an increase, including the GRF portion, at this point of $24.52. That's a 4.2% increase when compared to current year. And before we get into the line item variances for those budgets, I just want to show you a couple slides here that outline your sources of revenues. These are very helpful to offset your costs, and the pie chart might be hard to see on the screens, but the largest piece there in orange is your fines, fees, and chargeable services. So it's a collection of lots of different items that are offsetting costs elsewhere in your budget. The second biggest category there, interest income. This is truly a revenue generating area for you with very little expense to offset it. So you do have significant interest income on your invested fund balances, and we use that to increase your reserves. You do not take that as a reduction to your operating budget. You use it to build your reserve balances. Your laundry revenues are the next largest category from your coin-operated washers, and that revenue did increase from 2018, about mid-year 2018, when you increased your washer fee from 50 cents to $1, and that increase in revenues is accounted for in this budget for next year. Then you have various fees for lease processing, resale processing, and so forth. And as a nonprofit mutual benefit corporation, you do not charge fees more than what it costs. So these are used to offset some of your administrative costs. These are not a net profit revenues. Then moving on to the next slide, we can see a pie chart, a visual representation of your expenses and what categories comprise the majority of your expenses, starting, of course, with compensation and related expenses. This is for all your union and non-union staff specific to United Services. And as a service organization, you would expect a large piece of your expenses to be associated with the labor for both the infield and the administrative services that are being provided. Your next largest category is property and sales tax. As a co-op, it is unique and different from the condos, where you do have a mutual responsibility to pay those property taxes, and then you pass that through the assessment to the individual. And so for whatever reason, the community was built in such a way that the tax assessor the county did not assign individual parcel numbers. You have fictitious parcel numbers, and so United receives those bills, and we include those in the assessments that are unique to each individual unit based on the assessed value from the county tax assessor. It's a straight pass-through. We do not assign any administrative cost to that. It is reflective of the bills from the tax assessor. And then outside services is that blue piece of the pie. You can see that you do have several items that are performed by contractors for specialty items such as roof replacements, asphalt repair, plumbing remediation, and so forth. Then utilities follow that as your next largest category, about 9% of your total expenses, and then various miscellaneous categories. So you have $45.7 million in your gross operating expenses. We're able to reduce that by about $1.7 million for your non-assessment revenues. So now that we've looked at the large overview of your budget, we want to look by department and give you a better idea of the changes for the next year. And I did want to say up front that as we talk about each of these departments, an underlying assumption in these increases is wage adjustments. So we did include contracted wage adjustments for the union for all staffing levels, and that's at 2%. Per the contract, and that is negotiated separately. Those negotiations finished up towards the end of last year, and both medical and salary adjustments are made in this budget. And then on your non-union side, we've included an assumption of 3.2% for that wage adjustment. That has to cover cost of living increases, wage merit adjustments that are earned through the annual review. Also, it has to cover promotions and any new hires if the market is demanding a higher wage for certain positions, and we make those adjustments. And so that pool is going to be 3.2% next year for the non-union positions. And then also, I just wanted to note that Jeff might talk about it more later, that one of the benefit changes, really the only benefit change that we made for non-union was to expand the 401k, which is the retirement program for non-union employees. And the company match is currently 4%, and we increased that to 5% for next year, but we did not increase the budget. You have heard me talk every month in the finance meetings about one of your savings being lower participation in the 401k plan. It's very important for these non-pensioned positions to save for their eventual retirement, and so we want to encourage that, and this is one way that we want to get to increase participation in that benefit by increasing the company match. And we have estimated that we can do so without changing that budget. We have room in the existing budget to expand that program. So we're going to start here with, well, it's by department, but we're going to start with a non-department. That's a little confusing, but we do have various items that you pay directly that don't flow through what we call a work center or a division. And I have a delineation on slide 19 that Chris is going to jump to so you can see which line items are there. And this includes a total budget of $15 million. That is primarily your property tax, as we talked about. We have been seeing increased property values, and that does not go unnoticed by your Orange County tax assessor. And so each year they raise those assessed values, and the percentage you pay against those values increases. So our budget is trying to keep up with the tax assessor, and so we've increased that budget based on recent trends. And then also you can see that utilities and telephone are $4.3 million in total, and that's an increase of $96,000. We implemented the rates increases that were just adopted by El Toro Water District as of July 1st this year, and we've incorporated those into your budget for next year, as well as a contingency for a potential rate increase again next July. And so we do have an increase in the water budget. There is a delineation of the utilities on slide 26 that Chris can jump to, but if you have the agenda package, we do have the operating statement in there, and you can see all the ledger line items, including each individual utility. But you can just see here that $94,000 is primarily the water and sewer. We also adjusted the trash budget to reflect your current utilization. You have certain bin sizes and frequency of pickups, and the budget is just changing to reflect your current service level. I have a very small increase in electricity. You have been trending down in your consumption, but we have a contingency in there for rate adjustments next year. And so that is just a slight increase overall. On the non-work center budgets, you'll also see a line item for workers' comp insurance. And this is a contingency that we included for a retrospective adjustment. You've been on a retrospective plan that basically keeps open prior years, and that each year you either get a return of some of your premiums that you've prepaid, or you get a refund. In the last couple of years, we've had to pay I'm sorry, I said two things, either a return or you have to pay additional premium, depending on how those claims develop over a 5-year period. And so the last couple of years, you have had to pay additional premium for those open years. And so we put in a contingency budget for that in each of the corporations. If you end up paying this premium, it goes out to all the work centers, but because we don't know yet how much it will be, we put it in this non-work center budget. And just to let you know, we did change to a deductible plan this year for your workers' comp. So we're going to have to close out the prior 5 years, but going forward, you're on a deductible program that is more familiar to you with a typical insurance program where you're paying as you go instead of having to wait 5 years to see how the cases develop. So hopefully we won't have these kinds of adjustments for you in the future. So that's the primary changes on your non-work center budgets, with one more that I'd like to point out, and that's the legal fees. That budget is being proposed with a change there from $175,000 to $200,000. And I do have a legal fee slide as well. It's the last one, slide 27. I think it's important to point out the change here because we've got two categories. The first line is your mutual legal counsel, and that is a proposed budget of $200,000. That's a $25,000 increase, and that is reflective of about where you are projecting to go this year, a little lower than your 2018 actuals, but you can see your past history there. It fluctuates between $200,000 and $250,000. So optimistically, we included that budget at $200,000. And then we added a new line for the VMS legal fees. In the past, GRF has been paying, since the inception of VMS, all the legal fees, which was an unintended consequence of that management change and our allocation system. So I just want to give you a little history here on the VMS legal fees. The 2018 actuals came in over $700,000. And 2019, we're expecting to be between $500,000 to $600,000, and then 2020, the projection is $450,000. So you have some outstanding issues that you are addressing from the inception, and even some carryovers from prior to the VMS management change. And so we believe the projection of $450,000 for next year will be a good amount. And that is divided equally between the three members of VMS. GRF, United, and Third are the three members of GRF, of VMS. And so we have assigned a $150,000 budget to each of those to cover those legal fees.
To the chair, I want to add to that. Previous in discussions with some of the board members, the question was raised with regards to what is that $150,000. Just wanted to indicate that it is a composite of everything that has to do with employee litigation. And so although I can't go into precise numbers, the percentages are about last year and projecting for next year, about 60-40 in legal costs versus settlements. So 40% is settlements, 60% is actual legal cost. So I hope that.
All right, jumping back to slide 13, we're going to start here with the Office of the CEO, which is a proposed budget of $532,000. This is all included in your operating budget or your assessment, and that's an increase of $78,000, and that's due to, I'm not going to keep repeating it on every department, but just a reminder, it includes the wage adjustments, but also the new marketing content editor that we discussed. There was some additional budgets added for outside services. Your inspector of elections was previously unbudgeted, along with some allocations for website maintenance and graphic design that's used for your newsletter and so forth. Resident services is a budget of just over $1 million. That's all in operations, and that's an increase of $424,000. And this is due to an allocation change. You're going to hear on several of these line items that there's a change in allocations, and more costs are allocated to the mutuals based on the allocation basis that the department comes up with. And so for resident services, what they do is they look at the call center and the activity. So the more calls coming in for United, the more of those support costs that you get for their services. Then we also had a decrease in this category for resale processing revenues. So your resales are down, and so the resale division did adjust their revenue projections downward somewhat, and so that has an upward impact on your assessment. General services, this is a net cost of $1,135,000. Most of that is in operations. I do have a slide 20, to show the delineation of this department, although there's really just 2 lines shown here. I wanted to let you see how much of that is janitorial, $345,000 versus streets and sidewalks, which is $790,000. Now, your janitorial, you're familiar with the work that they do to clean your laundry rooms, the freestanding laundry rooms, and common areas. But then in that streets and sidewalks number, you have lots of different programs, such as your concrete repairs, gutter cleaning, common wall replacements or repairs, and some asphalt repair work, some welding that supports the program. So anything that's a minor repair, not part of a reserve program, is included in that budget. The next line is landscape services. That's a budget of $5,566,000, or an increase of $212,000. And that is primarily due to the staffing corrections that we talked about. And on slide 21, we can see a delineation of landscape. This budget was discussed in detail at your May version A meetings, where we had a special landscape meeting just to go over each of the service levels. Kurt Wyman presented this budget, answered questions, but this is just a reminder of those areas, primarily grounds maintenance, and then you have nursery, irrigation, equipment repair, landscape modernization, pest control, and tree maintenance. That comprises that budget. The last line item or department on slide 13 is information services. This is a budget of $532,000, and this is an increase here for a change in allocations. Again, this is one of those departments that looks at their support, and IT is always supporting the equipment and the network that are, the computers that are out in all the areas of operation. And so they look at not only the assignments of those computers and where they're located, but also the support calls. So if they have more support calls in resident services, for example, their resident services is going to receive a higher allocation of the IT costs. And then that might flow out to you if the call center is, allocating their cost to you. So it's an interdepartmental allocation. And we're going to talk about, we've had some questions through these budget meetings about the allocation system. We're going to talk about that in more detail at the upcoming GRF Finance meeting. So you have a good understanding of how those internal allocations work. Moving on to the next slide, financial services. We have 2 lines here. We have a budget of $1.2 million for financial services, which includes all of accounting, budget, financial planning, purchasing, warehouse, and the mailroom. But then we break out the property insurance line so you can see your insurance, which is almost $1 million. That's also included. We talked about the additional staff person in financial services, but I wanted to talk more about your insurances. We have a delineation on slide 22 so that you can see those insurance line items. We recently met with your broker and several members from the carriers and your brokerage firm, because they're very concerned about the upcoming renewal. Most of your policies renew on October 1st, and the insurance markets are tightening up, especially the property insurance. As you know, California has had significant damages from fires, including the Paradise Fire last year. And also the rest of the states have their own issues with the hurricanes and flooding and so forth. And so the property insurance, they said the increase could be as much as 40%. We included 30% in the budget because we know your broker will do everything they can to keep those costs, those premiums down. But it's been a very soft insurance market, and we've been pretty flat, but the increase is expected for next year. Also, the liability insurance, the property insurance is a budget of $974,000. Hazard and liability is $456,000. A smaller increase there, but still the liability market, they said, is also tightening up because of the automotive sector. And they blame or attribute it to distracted driving. And the eventual cost of that shows up in your liability policy. So those two increases I wanted to point out, and we'll keep you updated as that renewal happens. We usually report back to finance to let you know how the insurance renewals are going. The next department is security services. That's a budget for you of $140,000. Most of security is in the GRF budget, but you do get a portion assigned to you for laundry coin collection and hearings and so forth. And this is a slight decrease for you, and that's due to an increase in your violation revenue. So more revenues decrease the net cost of this area. Human Resources is the next department, and while you see zeros along there, that new $150,000 is just the VMS legal fees. HR allocates their personnel support costs out to the various departments, and so this is really just your 1/3 of the VMS legal fees that are included here. And last department is maintenance and construction. This is a budget of $18,194,000. $5.2 million of that is in your operating budget, which is part of your assessment. The rest of it is in your reserve program, and you fund those items through your contributions to reserves. And they just have a slight increase here of $90,000, and this is due to, as we discussed, the wage adjustments. And we did have some reductions there in the union medical. We were able to negotiate costs lower than what we had placed as a contingency in the budget, so we have a savings there in the union medical, and then the workers' compensation. So your total budget there, that brings you down to the net operating budget of $43,996. That's for both operating and reserves. And so when we look at just your assessment, we're talking about the operating portions of those budgets, and then reserve contributions are handled separately. So I did want to go through your reserve funds quickly, starting with your contingency fund. Instead of adding a line in your budget called contingency, which many HOAs do, the size of your operations here warrant a separate fund that is just like a savings account. You put money aside into this contingency fund for any unexpected expenditure that's not covered by your operating budget. And so it's used for the repair, replacement, for anything that's damaged or higher costs. Let's say you have unexpected legal fees, you could take money out of your contingency fund. Everything spent from this fund is by supplemental appropriation approved by resolution at the board level. And this is completely up to the board how much money you want in this fund. Your fund was as high as almost $6 million. You were at $5.9 million in 2015, and that went down to $3 million the following year because you used these funds to pay for your solar system. And so you've been at about $3 million mark since then. We do anticipate that will go down somewhat if you follow this recommendation to reduce the contribution $5 to help offset your increased operating costs. On the next slide, we have your reserve fund. This one is required by civil code, so this one does have a lot more calculation behind it. And as you know, we outsourced your reserve study for 2020, and you had a separate presentation and meeting to go over the reserves plan. And we've just shown us a snippet of it here, but we did talk in detail about that. We were able to lower this assessment from what was originally recommended. They had originally recommended over $7, almost $8 per man per month increase for 2020. And we brought it down to $4 by making two changes, and that was to spread out the waistline remediation program from 6 years to 10 years, and to reduce the cost of the tree trimming program. Both of those had a pretty significant impact on your upcoming, like the next 5 years. And so the reserve specialist was comfortable going with the recommendation of a $4 increase instead of I think it was $7.78 in the original version. And but you can see in the years thereafter, there are still some increases that are anticipated. Now, as you know, we update the reserve study every year so that we start with the new balances. If money wasn't spent, it stays in reserve. So we started this one, as you can see on page 17. The starting balance is 17.1 million. That's a projection, but how we get there is we take the audited fund balance as of December 31st, 2018, which I don't have on here, but I think it was about $19 million. And then we do a projection of your expenditures for the current year, and that becomes the starting point for 2020. And so that $19 million that we started the year with was higher than anticipated than our last year's projection because of some monies that weren't spent. If you do not spend money that's earmarked from reserve, it stays in the reserve, and that becomes our starting point for the new plan year. So this presentation looks a little different than what we've used in the past because we're just taking excerpts out of this contracted reserve study and wanted to show you his highlights. This is part of his executive summary. And the company name is called Association Reserves. And what they want to do is they measure your reserve funding or how well you're funded in reserves by your risk of assessment. Whereas in the past, what we focus on is a threshold. We want to look at a cash flow and make sure you don't drop below a certain threshold. Well, the reserve specialists, they want to get you to full funding, which we know is not the goal in a community this size to be fully funded. But we do want to keep you out of what they would call risk for special assessment. And so with this plan, they are estimating that you will be able to report to your members in the fall that you are 40%, you're anticipating to be 40% funded or 39.8% funded. That's a very good position for you. Years ago, we actually did a survey of the board members to say, we looked in depth as to what your tolerance level was for reserves. And that in your minds, back then, the ideal funding balance was to be 40% funded. So I was happy to see this result, that this gets us there. We used a method for calculating your percent funding that was very, very ultra conservative. And we've been reporting you down in the teens, right? 15, 18% funded because we're using a straight line depreciation method. And industry standard allows you to use a cash flow method on those items where you don't have history to project exactly what's going to happen in the future. So you can look at your annual run rate and say, we're going to spend about this much every year based on our recent experience. And then that gives you a less, I don't know how to express it in non-financial terms, but we're being a little less conservative when reporting that percent funded because you're looking at your annual amounts instead of the full amount of the component and how it depreciates. So I like this method. It's a better message to your members. I feel like it is a fair representation of your reserve funding. You have been addressing your reserve needs. You have been putting money aside, and it shows through this plan. Now, a reserve specialist, of course, will want you to get to 100%, but I think you're pretty comfortable maintaining this level, and that's what this plan does. The next slide, you won't be able to read this on the monitors or on the TVs at home, but we just wanted to show you that Civil Code requires a 30-year outlook on your reserves. We obviously spend most of the year focusing on the upcoming budget year. So for 2020, we go into detail about all your reserve programs and how much is going to be spent and for what scope of work. But to meet Civil Code requirements, we do have to do a 30-year projection, which your reserve specialist has done here. And so if you can read it on your handout, you can see that they have a plan to get to 100% funded. But it's really the first 5 to 10 years where you have you're spending down this fund, and we do want to keep you at a comfortable funding level, above 30% funding level, or in the old terms, above a certain threshold. And this fund will help show the strength in your reserve and that you have a low risk for any special assessments. So if Chris will just jump back to the slide 10, which is the summary of your business plan at this point, I just wanted to turn it back over to you. This is the end of our formal presentation. We'd be happy to take questions from the board and the audience.
Thank you, Betty. We're going to go slide by slide. We'll start with, excuse me, Jeff's slides. Are there any questions from the board on any of Jeff's slides? Andre? Slide number?
This is in general. Okay. The heading says United Laguna Woods Mutual 2020 budget priorities. In the details, I'm looking at, for example, slide number 4 on page 2. It's in 2019, 10 buildings lined. This is what we plan to do for 2019. Slide number 5, in 2019, that's what we plan for 2019. And as Troy, you go through the slides, they all talk about 2019. There's no 2020 plan. What happened?
As I indicated to you, the purpose of it was to talk about what you're doing this year, 2019, and what we're moving forward in the future. And I was just trying to explain in the budget that we're preparing in 2020 what you've already accomplished and what you're
Right.
accomplishing in 2019. It's not a retro. It's a retro view of where you've accomplished, and not a presentation relative to 2020. 2020 was what Betty did.
So is there any 2020 budget priorities at all?
The priorities are in your 2020 plan as you proposed, as it's been proposed.
I don't see any proposed, for example, seal code programs include 2019 including 14 cul-de-sacs. Do we have any 2020 plan including how many cul-de-sacs?
I think again, the proposal in the 2020 budget is the budget itself. When we went through the M&C presentation to you and went through the landscaping presentation, that's when we made those actual presentations. I did not include them in the whole packet. We presented to the board before. So this was intentionally specific to what you've accomplished and what you're accomplishing this year. If you want to go back to the landscaping and maintenance and construction presentations, I can certainly get you those PowerPoints.
Could you just attach those in that format? For example, slide number 9, 2019 program includes 14 cul-de-sacs. Can we add a bullet that the 2020 program includes these cul-de-sacs and for every one of these slides? That will be very helpful comparison rather than we have to go to different places, find the information.
We can get you that information.
Thank you very much. Okay. I have other questions, but I'll let other people ask first. I have to find those in question.
All right, are there any other questions on Jeff's presentation? Cash?
It's more for clarification, Jeff. Slide number 4, you're talking about experience high copper pipe leak frequency. Do we have any number on how many we are talking about?
On the actual number of leaks? No, I don't have that one.
Okay.
We can pull that up and get it for you.
I was just wondering if it's a major problem or what. My second question is on slide 5. Can I ask 2 or 3?
Yes.
On slide 5, whenever we have new construction and people put, say, a microwave oven or a washer and dryer in the units and stuff like that, do we tell them to replace the panel at their cost? We should tell them that. Because
I understand your question. I don't have that right in front of me. It's part of our operation budget. I don't think there is a specific charge relative to a panel. That's what you're asking?
yes, we should tell them to replace it at their cost. Also, the picture you're showing there is not a Pushmatic panel, it's a new panel.
Well, right. We're replacing the old panels, the Pushmatic panels.
Okay, I have maybe 1 or 2 other questions. On slide 14, again, you're talking about Shepherd's Crook. But I thought Shepherd Crook was that knife edge thing that rolls around. And that's not, no, it's not? It's not, okay. Okay, that's fine. One, maybe second last question. Slide number 15, you're talking about 90% RFID. You're talking about all 6,300 units, we have that many already registered?
Yeah.
Wow, thank
We've
you.
been very successful in people getting the RFIDs. It's been very good.
Okay, and my last question on slide 16, isn't this generators in that slide GRF responsibility? Or why are we showing it here?
It is. This is, again, I just wanted to
Just to
talk
show.
about what's going on in United and what are some of the nice, when I say nice, improvements and activities that we've been enforcing.
Okay, thank you.
Director.
Thank you. I thought I had this all nailed down, but I just can't find, okay, on expenditures by department, which would be slides.
Okay, Elsie, we're not there yet. If you'll wait just a minute, we're going
we
to see
are?
if there's any other questions on Jeff's presentation before we get into Betty's.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's right, please excuse me.
All right, Director Armandaris.
Thank you, Juanito. This is just a general comment. I was glad to see you present these slides because they're all, except for the one for the RFID, all expenditures that come out of our reserves. And what I'd like to remind everybody is that if you have a totally remodeled unit, the mutual is no longer responsible for replacing any of those items. And in prior budget meetings in prior years, I have requested, and that's what I'm doing now, requesting that we identify all those units. Because right now, we don't know how many units have been remodeled, and that would have a definite impact on how much money we need in reserves to replace these things. So again, I don't know if you're aware of that, Jeff, but I think that would be a good information to develop in the coming year. Thank you.
Were there other questions for Jeff? All right, we'll go on to Betty. I'll start down at the end with Anthony. Do you have any questions for Betty on the business plan?
Madam Chair?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no questions. Thank you.
Now, I'm going to do the audience last. That's all right, I'm still going to do the audience last. All right, Mr. Armandaris, on the 2020 business plan?
Yes, I have a couple of questions having to do with reserves. You mentioned that if funds aren't expended, of course, they remain in reserves. I mean, where else would they go? So You've seen the information I've presented before. Isn't it correct that through 2018, that we've accumulated over $6 million in unspent funds in reserves? And they're far greater than was originally projected for that year? Is that not correct?
Yes, for the last several years, the expenditures have come in lower than the budget. That money stays in reserve, and so each year when we update the reserve, we take that fund balance from the audit report. And so we started with 19 million, and we would have anticipated starting with a lower amount. So we do account for those funds by always updating that reserve balance.
So in other words, we have accumulated quite a bit of cushion, then, $6 million worth.
No, because at the same time, you have expenditure updates, right? So we don't just update nothing stays static in the reserves plan. So we're updating the reserve balance, the contributions, and the expenditures. So your planned expenditures now you've got to have the assessments going in to cover those planned expenditures.
Okay, let
So
me
all
ask-
three of those
Let me ask that a
components.
different way. Isn't it true that the reserve balances currently are far greater than was originally projected back then when you were doing these budgets?
They are
Right,
higher,
yeah.
but so are your planned
All right,
expenditures.
thank you.
So are your planned expenditures.
Director Margolis?
I have one little question on the operating expense. We have mileage and meal allowance, and we have a large number there. And I understood that GRF was buying cars so that the mileage would go down. Is there any, it's just a tiny bit of money, but it would be nice if we saw that go down. When you buy the cars, you're putting money into cars so people have cars here.
We can look at that and see if any of the vehicle additions will reduce that funding.
Okay, Director Chong?
I have several questions here. Looking at slide number 7, staffing full-time equivalents, and correspondent information on slide 9. Okay, let's look at slide number 7 first. If we cut off between 2015 and 2016, before 2015, it's PCM. After 2015, starting from 2016, it's VMS. I'm looking at the chart and I said, the villages still remain the same. The residents pretty much the same, okay? Age-wise, the same thing. And we have a lot of automations. We talked about a lot of improvements. And why are we creeping back to the previous employment level? And is there any way we go to this VMS concept is because we want to reduce the cost, but seems like we are going back to the employment cost at this point. Okay, so that's one of the questions I have, the first question. The second question is about page 11, slides 11 and 12. Let's look at slide 12 first, okay? Property and sales tax is 24%. Based on the total expense of $45.7 million, it's somewhere close to $11 million, roughly. Let's go back to slide number 11. If we may, go back to one slide. Yes, there is no property and sales tax. Property and sales tax is just passed through. If we counted it in the expense, it should be counted in the revenue. But it's $11 million. So I can sort of understand why we want to leave it out. Otherwise, everything else is dwarfed by this $11 million, okay? So I think in the expense sources, we need to take it out to calculate a percentage. And if we take it out, the employee compensation and related expenses is going to be increased from 32% to 42%, okay? So that's what I'm curious. I think we need to compare apples to apples, okay?
So
In this
Andre,
ca-
let me just clarify on these revenue sources. These are non-assessment revenue sources. So this is money that comes in outside of the assessment. Property tax comes in through the assessment.
Right, that's what I said.
So this is non-assessment revenues,
Right.
fines, fees, chargeable services.
Right. I'm talking about the property and sales tax. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about
Right,
anything
that's
else.
part of the assessment.
Right. But the revenue sources doesn't include that. Okay, so here, if we include the property tax here, but not in the revenue sources, we are artificially reduce the percentage of others expenses. This is quite a big expense here. So I would suggest that we remove property tax from the expense sources. Okay, that will give us a better, clearer picture of this. And like I said, employee compensation and related expenses will increase from 32% to 42%. If it's a pass-through expense, we're not taking advantage of it. We have nothing to do with it, just passing through. Let's move it out, equally. Okay, that's my recommendation.
All right, Betty, would you like to talk about that? No. All right.
No, hold on, let me finish my questions. Okay. And about slide 14. Security services is $140,000 expenditure. But if we look at slide number 9, the security service has a staff of 119.68, 120 people. And their expenditure is only $140,000. 100 people for $140,000 each one cost $1,000. I'm a little bit confused. Other departments, some of them $12,000, $37,000, $100,000. I can understand that there are other equipment expenses, that kind of thing. But this 120 people expenditure is only $140,000. Maybe I need some information to understand it. Okay. And slide number 19. If we look at the legal fees, well, actually, probably better one will be the last one, slide number 27. The mutual expense is $200,000. Is that one mutual?
That's just United.
Just United, okay. So if we add it up, altogether, it's $200,000 times 3 mutuals. United, Third, and GRF, plus VMS, $150,000, $750,000. Okay, I'm wondering, can we just hire one attorney to take care of all these, so we won't have legal counsels butting head against each other? Okay, we have one legal counsel to take care of the whole business. I think $750,000, we can probably hire a good one. Okay? So, that's basically my question, and I missed something, maybe I missed something. And I want to explain a little bit about reserve funding plan. You mentioned that previously the percentage was 15 to 17%, and right now it's about 40%, 39.8%. I want to make it clear that we changed the accounting method, we changed the calculation method, so the number looks much better now, okay? Based on the suggestion, this is a more realistic approach, okay? I can accept that. But I just want to make sure that let's not compare the 30% to 15%, 17% in the past, because this is a totally different accounting approach, okay? So that's all my questions, and if I can get some answers.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Did you want to respond?
we will. With regards to the first question, which was regarding the chart on page 7 and the employee count, I think the question really was with the technical improvements that the village has made, why are we seeing the employment back at the same number it was in 2011? Primarily, the increase that you've seen in the 2020 proposed budget are for positions that are related directly to the most significant one is in the area of landscaping. These are direct people on the ground that are doing landscape work. These are not technology improvements that I can enhance. We are and continue to look at ways in which, if there is possibilities of reducing or eliminate operations where we don't need personnel, or we can reduce personnel, because that is a big expense. We certainly are evaluating that, but the reason you are labor intensive, and this comes from my past experience from managing other organizations, is because of the activities that you are providing in the way of services are very, very much employee enhanced. And so I think the level at 751 to meet the obligations and needs that the not only United but the whole village needs is adequate and appropriate funding for that. With regards to the second question on personnel, which had to do with security, I would say it's even more than 90% of all security is under GRF. This is the security that relates specifically to United. And again, that's going into the laundry rooms and handling the security with regards to that. 96% of all security is under GRF budget, not under yours. That's why it's such a small number. With regards to legal fees, I believe, and I'm not the attorney for any of the mutuals, but there is legal differences, there's contractual differences with regards to each of the mutuals, and I think it's been determined that in the best interest of everyone that they have their own separate attorneys. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Betty, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that the revenues are non-assessment revenue. So property tax, just like everything else, legal fees, salaries and wages and so forth is included in the assessment, and that chart was not showing the assessment revenues. Then on the reserves funding plan, it's a good point. And just to clarify, we did, if I didn't make that point earlier, we did change the method of calculating the percent funding, which it better goes with your cash flow method of looking at your reserve components. And so we were happy to have a reserve specialist do that. We actually hired them to make that same calculation for third, so they could benefit from that new method as well. We just don't have the software to be able to do that in-house.
Thank you. All right, Cash.
Slide number 3, our mission statement, Jeff, should have some indication that we have many fixed income people, and that utmost in active living should have some kind of check mentioned in our mission. And that I would like to just suggest, maybe we should have a couple words towards that. The second thing I have question, and I somewhat agree with Andre here on slide number 7. We should stop comparing previous activity to present activity. 2016 is the first one we should start comparing. And now we are showing an increase in personnel, which is okay, because we are getting better service and it requires more personnel. I have another question here. Did I miss one? Hold on. Betty, you're on slide 10. You're showing a $5 decrease in contingency. I don't think we should use that $5 just to justify that we are increasing. our assessments, that $5 should really be not removed from contingency. Because you're showing in one of the slides that somewhere, on slide 15, that we are trying to put aside $600,000 of the contingency funds ending balance from 2,669,000 to 2,065,000. So if we're trying to spend that kind of money, then we shouldn't try to, this is like showing us that we don't need that money, but that we do need it. So let's show it there. I have one more question on slide 12. Again, property and sales tax is really not an expense per se, in the sense we collect that money back again. But you cannot show that as an expense up front here without not showing income on the other end, which I didn't see anywhere that shows that income. And 1/4 roughly of 45 million is like $10+ million. It's just an accounting method, but it should be clear up front. And yeah, I have one last little comment, question on slide 22. Where does our earthquake insurance fall in terms of all these insurance bills that you're trying to show? Which pocket does it fall under? Under hazard and liability?
Property. Property.
Under property? Okay. And I guess that's all I have. Yes.
Thank you. Carl, did you have some questions?
Do you need a response?
Yeah, we can respond.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So we're going to start off again back on slide 7. I appreciate the comment relative to looking at, I just did want to note also, and if you look at that change from which is noted from 2015 to 2016 when we made the transition was made, part of the reason that dropped is employees left the organization when the change was made. Wasn't necessarily a positive thing. That was just it wasn't an intended consequence, let's put it that way. It
And
was a
specifically, what
consequence.
happened in the budget is your new CEO took all those open positions out of the budget, right? So the transitional CEO took advantage of that transition, lowered the budget, and as you can see, over the next 2 years, that same CEO had to add back the positions, but added them back in areas where you really needed to focus, like customer service and landscape. So that was the benefit, is they came out of other areas where maybe you weren't getting the most benefit from them, and focused them on what your biggest concerns were at the time of the transition. And as far as the slide that includes property insurance, the point of that slide is to show your total expenses for which you're responsible for, because you, United, have to pay that property tax bill, just like you have to pay your legal fees. And so you make those payments, and what we're showing on that slide of the expenses is all the expenses that you are dispersing. And all of it's recovered through the assessment. You recover legal fees through the assessment, you recover property tax through the assessment. So if we want a different slide, I can certainly take out property tax and show it without property tax. That's no problem.
All right, now, Carl.
I appreciate all that you've done with this budget, having gone through this so far. I just have one question, some surprise to me today that I found out, maybe it was said before, but I wasn't aware of it. In your reserve fund, you indicated that we were able to reduce it down, because the last time we spoke, it was higher than this number, and one of the things that you mentioned was the fact that we have now gone from the 6-year water waistline remediation down to up to 10, and we just brought it down from 12 to 6 last year. And we decided under the circumstances that we wanted to do that 12 to 6 was the fact that any water intrusion events would be mitigated if, over a shorter period of time, if we were to go with the 6 years. But now, because of the fact, and I'm understanding that everybody's trying to reduce this, these these assessments, okay? But I don't think that I would have taken that one out, because if we have a lot of water intrusion events, then it's either pay me now, pay me later, okay? You're gonna have to, it costs you X amount of dollars to do the waistline remediation, and it costs you X amount more dollars, basically, to have somebody sit in a hotel room or what have you, because the fact that their manor has got flooded out. But I guess that was made without my knowledge at this particular point in time. At least I was not aware of it, that we decided to do that. Is that a correct statement? That's what we're doing?
It's a recommendation, yes.
Oh, it's a recommendation. And what would that mean if we put the waistline remediation back to 6?
Then that reserve contribution is going to go back up to the $7 to $8 range. So we did two things to get, we heard that you were concerned about the increase in the reserve contribution, and so we made two changes to get it down to the $4. One was the cost of the tree trimming, and the other was spreading out, not back to 12 years, but to 10 years, the waistline remediation.
Right. But the last time we spoke at budget meeting number 1, I thought we said that you had indicated that there was a possibility to go from the 778 down to 5. That was the number I remember being mentioned, okay? And the waistline remediation wasn't one of the things that would have been the thing that would have been deleted. So I'm a bit confused on that one. Because then we went from the 778 down to 5, but now we're at a $4 number, so there are numbers here that I'm confused about. So in any case, it would be my thought that we would try to put that back in, but if the rest of the board decides that they want to just bring this down to the $24 and let it go with the 10 years, so be it. But as I said, there's a possible price to pay to delay it, and that's the reason why we eventually decided to go with the 6 years, to mitigate that possibility of waistline water intrusion into the manors. Thank you.
All right. Director Armendariz, we're not going to go back to a second question until all the board has. No, not until everybody has spoken. Maggie?
Thank you. I am concerned on a couple of levels. We bumped up the epoxy for the waistlines because the need has increased. I don't know of any signs or records that show that it has decreased, and yet we are willing to, the suggestion is to move it back out to 10 years. Would you like to be in one of the 10-year, 9-year, 8-year units? Let me know. We'll make a list. I don't think this is reasonable. I am quite concerned about that because there are so many other costs. We look at the cash flow and I don't know, I'm sorry, that's just an outside comment. The other comment I have, that is very concerning to me, the epoxy lines, and I think we need to be as fast as we can epoxying the supply lines so that the buildings are not leaking in the walls from the copper piping. I am also wondering, I just got a report from Landscape yesterday, and it showed that we are down 8 landscape positions, 18 landscape positions since 2014. So comparing 2014, which was before the transition, to now, we have lost 18, or we no longer have 18 positions. Whether they disappeared or not, I don't know. But the number of people is down by 18. And so it is, for landscape, it is not the lovely picture here, maybe that comes from somewhere else. But from 2014 to 2018, landscape is down 18. Not that we're not trying to do the best we can. And maybe we are getting new plans and things. I keep hearing of things, so I'm not worried about that. But the epoxy line scares me. I am also wondering if the tree removal new one, the taking it down, is that going to move us out of the 5-year program to longer? Or is that the move from the 3-year to the 5-year, which we are currently implementing? And that's just my question on it. Thank you.
All right. You have some answers?
Cool. So going back to, I guess, a quick answer on the landscaping. We obviously saw that trend in landscaping prior to 2018. Going into the 2019, the decision was to get staffing numbers back up in landscaping, because that was one of the areas where we were receiving a lot of concerns and questions and requests. So we bumped that budget back up and bumped the number of employees back up. And the 2020 budget reflects making sure that we're budgeting appropriately for all the positions that we've had in. They are down 5 positions in landscaping right now, and we're working on, certainly the recruitment process for that is ongoing. And adjusting that relative to the tree trimming operation, it would be trying to maintain that 5-year, not the 3-year. The 5-year, again, is partly trimming trees, partly reviewing what trees need to be trimmed, and it's not necessarily systematically going in and trimming every tree every 5 years, because we just don't do it that way. But it is trying to maintain the new mantra of how we're going about doing that. But we're going to have to evaluate that, because we just need to be more efficient on how we're doing the tree trimming. I'll maybe ask.
And on the waistline program, you had planned $2.3 million a year in your expenditures. We did not change 2020. The budget for 2020 is still at that level, but on the reserves plan, we went down to $1.3 million a year. So that just extended it out a little bit. And obviously, you can make a different decision next year, but the 2020 budget remained at the $2.3 million.
All right. Gary?
Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank staff for all of the time that you have invested in putting all of this together, because it's taken a lot of time and effort, and then thank you. Secondly, I want to say that our infrastructure has not been addressed for 50 years. And therefore, I also want to go with Carl and Maggie and say I'm very concerned about the epoxy lining with the sewers, because it's cost us a lot of money. And we moved that back to 6 years because we were having so much expenditure dealing with water cleanup, and that's why we went back to 6 years. I am concerned with anything dealing with water, supply lines, sewer lines, along our foundations where we're having water coming off the roofs and deteriorating our foundations. So anything dealing with water, it concerns me. But I would have to say, I don't want to have to be moving out because my sewer line backs up. And I guess if we have to move, and maybe it's changed, but when we first did this, I know the supply lines were not as much a problem as the sewer lines. And therefore, maybe some of the money that we're putting into the supply lines, we can move into the sewer lines. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Any replies?
Maybe if I can get Ernesto to come up.
Yes, Ernesto, would you help us, please?
I'll get on the microphone first and ask Ernesto to come up and maybe speak to Gary's question.
Good morning. As Betty stated, the funding for next year is remaining at $2.3 million level. The budget shows a slight increase because actually we did a budget adjustment last year, but it's the 2.3 million level that the mutual had requested for us to go to. And that's to get the accelerated program that you requested. Subsequent to that, for the purpose of the reserves, I think that was brought down, the funding levels. Again, you can deliberate on this next year and see if you want to bring it back to the level that you're at right now. But for 2020, you will be at the $2.3 million level. With regards to the epoxy lining of your potable water lines, that's a very variable program. There's no rhyme or reason where these things go bad or not. They're supposed to last many, many years, and they typically do, but we experience problems with them from time to time. There's no rhyme or reason on when that happens. Fortunately, in United, we're not seeing that trend. We've seen a pretty level maintenance requirement for those lines. So I do not recommend that you bump that up unless the trend is telling you that you should. And we're monitoring those very carefully through the MNC committee to keep our finger in the pulse on that. So if we're seeing a trend happening, we do address it. We do have a proactive and a reactive program as far as epoxying water lines. Whenever we find that there's a problem, we don't only epoxy that manner, but we epoxy the entire building. So it's a little bit on the proactive side. But fortunately, the mutual is not experiencing the problems that we're seeing in Third right now. Third, we've recommended a big increase but again, there's no rhyme or reason on why this is occurring.
Thank you, Ernesto. All right, Director Addington, do you have some questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe in always paying yourself first in your own personal budget, and I believe that we should pay ourselves first in our United budget. Maybe I'm a little too hung up on savings accounts, but I have found in my life that disasters always do happen. So anyway, keeping that in mind, how much, I'm not quite clear, do we have a specific number per manor? Because that's what everybody's interested, per manor, per month. How much either severally or together, the going back to, pumping it out to 10 years on the waistline remediation and I guess somehow cutting the tree trimming program. What was the per manor per month figure on those two items, or was that the main?
Well, your
cutback?
reserve specialist had a recommendation, and I forget, maybe you remember, 772 or 778?
778.
As your increase, 778. And we gave him those changed assumptions, and he changed his recommendation down to $4.
And the change
increase.
assumptions were to go back to to pump it out to 10 years and to cut back some of the, so he came back with that. Okay, so, and that was a cut of how much per month then?
$3.
Huh? The
$3.78.
$3.78. Okie dokie.
But I don't know how much is because of one or the other.
That's fine, together is great. Okay, my point is, because this gets to the nice part of my statement, that I'm just totally impressed at how our whole United operation runs, because I'd like to point out to the board members, as well as anybody else listening, that even like with these suggested cuts, the plan per manor per month is $603.04. And as everybody knows, until they're sick of hearing about it, United residents get for free a lot of items that people don't get in Third, right? We get replacement countertops, we get replacement, we all know, the toilets, the floors, blah, blah, if you're not an alteration manor. Anyway, so So we should be higher than, I mean, not should be, but in theory, we should be higher than Third. Well, in fact, Third's new proposed version 2 is $650.54 per man or per month. And if you live in a building that has elevators or private laundry rooms like those pretty garden villas, those are $673.60 a month. So that's only if you have those special places, well, including the surcharges. Still, some of those people are paying $70 more than our proposed, and just the regular Third is $40-some more. So I think for $3.78 more a month, I don't like to pay it, nobody likes to pay it, but for what we get for our money, I'm just incredibly impressed. And I just think an extra $4 isn't going to kill us to make us secure with remediated, I'm almost done, with remediated water lines and the tree trimming that everybody seems really concerned about. Thank you.
All right, according to Robert's rules, directors have a chance for one more question before we go
To
to,
respond to her.
oh, I'm sorry. I keep forgetting to let you respond. Please respond.
Well, I'm not sure I can, other than thank you for the comment on putting the budget together, but this is a policy decision for the board relative to the issue. We went back and evaluated making some adjustments in those two areas that we mentioned. We think we can operate efficiently there. We think we can address the issues going forward there. As Ernesto said, with regards to the evaluation of the water intrusion process and all of those, and the improving the lines and everything, we can come back in the next year and see how our workload has been and evaluate that. And certainly you could make an adjustment at that point in time, and may need to. We're hoping and we believe that making that adjustment to a 10-year program is reasonable from a staff's point of view, and clearly do on the tree trimming. If you were going to make a or, I think the tree trimming is a solid recommendation. I feel comfortable there. I think the other one is more debatable with regards to how you want as a policy.
And I would just add that if you want to go back to your 2.3 million a year for the waste lines, we can put that in and see if the reserve specialist could keep us within the $5 increase. I'm guessing that the bulk of the reduction came from the trees. And then I also believe we can offset that dollar increase by looking at revenues. Director Margolis yesterday pointed out to me some run rates on your revenues this year and for some of your fines and fees and charges, and we can, it looks like we have room to increase the revenue assumption by about $1 that could offset that.
Thank you. All right, background once again. Anthony, did you have anything?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have nothing.
Okay. Director Armendariz?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion.
This
Motion
is
that I
not, no,
propose.
this is not a time for motions.
When will we have that time?
Well, we're not going to,
I recognize we don't vote till next time, but I still think this is the proper place to bring a motion. Why is
we
that
can,
not
well, we can make
correct?
suggestions, and they have, and we did. and
Okay,
they're gonna
let
be
me make a
looking at it, But we're
recommendation.
we're not doing it by motion right now. So if
Okay,
you'd
I'd like to make a
suggestion, recommendation, great, thank you.
Okay. My recommendation, and when I get the right opportunity, it will be a motion. My recommendation is that in place of increasing the reserve fund contribution, which has been increased from $148 to $152.02, then in place of that $4.02 increase, that we reduce that from $148 a month to $139.50. And that's basically splitting the increase in the monthly assessment for next year. And the reason I say that is because we have excess funds in reserves right now And it has no effect on the expenditures for next year, which VMS has told us are adequate for wasteline remediation, adequate for water line remediation, and all other required expenditures out of reserve, recognizing that we do have aging infrastructure and we do have demands. And for example, the wasteline in 2018 was budgeted at $1,500,000. And that was increased last year to $2.3 million. But because we ran into more needs in 2018, we then drew from the 2019 budget a $200,000 amount, okay? So that's why it shows $2.1 million instead of $2.3 million. And that's when we adopted reducing it down to a 6-year plan from a 12-year. This year's budget, the same thing. 6-year plan, $2.3 million. So this has no effect on the planned expenditures that we feel are necessary because of our aging infrastructure. So my recommendation is a win-win situation for both VMS and particularly for the members who are not just facing a $603 assessment, they're also facing increased property taxes and so on. We probably have members here that have their assessment going up to $1,000 or more. And this is a retirement community for a lot of them that, have limited funds. So that's my recommendation. Thank you.
Do I have a response?
You have a study from your reserve specialist. We can ask him to tweak the assumptions, but we're going to follow his recommendation.
All right, thank you. All right, Director Margolis.
I think we need to look at what we have and how much we're spending, and we aren't spending as much as we have, and we need to make sure that we use the money wisely. I'd like to see efficiencies improved and a lot of things like that. I think we could go down by $4, so we would be at a $20 assessment increase instead of a $24. And I think we can work that through. Thank you.
All right. Director Chong.
Thanks, Chair. A couple, during the budget priority discussion, we talked about the priorities, the 2020 project priorities are in the committee report, But I hear that MSC doesn't know that, landscape doesn't know that. So I'm kind of confused. And I would really like to see those proposed, and you mentioned that's a proposed, okay. I would really like to see them complete in this budget priority with 2020, so we can compare apple to apple. At this point, we don't even know what else is missing there, or what else has changed that we were trying to follow our board director's direction at this point, okay. The second thing is still on page 7, slide number 7. My question is, all the automations doesn't seem to have too much effect on the labor reduction, okay? And we keep on asking more people. I'm not a proponent of eliminating employees. I'm thinking about through regular attrition, we should be able to achieve the same thing with the automation. So we spend so much money on that, and we are not getting the benefit from it. Something's wrong there. Either we got the wrong automation, which doesn't help us at all, or we got the automation, but we didn't take advantage of the automation. So something's wrong. I'm from IT, so every money I spend, I should have a justification, saving company money, okay? And the labor cost is one of the biggest ones. So I'm looking at it and say, something's do not jive there, okay? And page 19, slide number 19, about legal fees. I understand that the legal fees, now you explained, I understand it includes many, many other legal functions. So what I'm asking is, But I feel that if we got one legal counsel, we will have a much more harmonic village, rather than all the legal counsels going against each other, trying to protect its own mutual. This is one big community. We need to work together. Okay. And as far as slide number 21, okay, and everything else, all the delineations, is it possible that we get some kind of monitoring report to see what kind of work we've accomplished during the budget priorities, and we understand that, yes, everything is on track, or if we see something slip, then we say, something's wrong, let's look into it. At this point, it seems like during the year, we just say everything's okay, until it's too late, okay? I understand it could be either short of resources, short of labor, or a critical path being impacted. We need to find out what's going on there before they become a big problem. Thank you very much. And I also want to know, do we still have the director's comment afterwards, or this?
No, we don't.
We don't? Okay, in that case, I would like to make a suggestion that we have 3 cost reduction proposals from VMS, see what kind of cost reductions we can achieve with our current staff and ability. Okay, if that's possible, what we're talking about is it's not possible to reduce any cost reduction, I have some doubt. We have some efficiency and effectiveness problem. So it needs to be really see where can we improve our expense structure and make our place much more efficient. Thank you very much.
Director Akrakar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think you have done an excellent job, and I'm sure this being second iteration, you're going to improve that 2452 by a little bit. And try to see if we can increase the contingency fund that you talk about cutting down by 5 by a little less, so put more money there. But excellent work. Also, I would like to say one thing. I have a GRF event that I'm conducting today, so I have to leave. I have to meet the gentleman at 12.
Noon, yes, I understand. Okay, thank you. Carl?
I'd just like to say that, as I said before, there's a lot of work went into this. This is the second rendition. I hear people say that maybe we can reduce this, but then I see a lot of things that needed to get done. And in this community, we had a lot of infrastructure that during the time of the previous administration nothing got done. They did a lot of work whereby they did the lawns and they painted things, but the dry rot underneath the paint was basically, in time, was going to basically show. So as a result of that, I don't understand how we can possibly reduce this, and I am all for reducing it, but we also need to get the work done. And you go outside this fence and you find out how many various different things they have. They may have one swimming pool, they may have one swimming pool and a tennis court. We have so many things in this community, and yet for that amount, we really don't pay what they pay outside of this community. We pay a lot less than what they do for what we get. Now, I'm on a fixed income also. I don't know if anybody, I know everybody else is, and under the circumstances right now, we need to pay for infrastructure upgrades and fixing the infrastructure because it will start. We'll have a lot of nice things. You'll go out swimming or what have you, okay? But as a result of that, your house may start falling apart and what have you, okay? Because we haven't addressed it. Water issues with regard to undermining foundations and what have you. If you go to the M&C committee, you'll hear about that. In this community, we also do not have copper pipe problems as they do in Third because when they installed it in United, they used a larger gauge copper pipe. When they did the Third, they had a smaller gauge copper pipe. So now they're seeing pinhole problems in their pipe. We don't have that, but we have cast iron pipes. So as a result of that, that's what I say. And under the circumstances, I don't see, I still think we need to have the waistline remediation issue.
Thank you. Maggie?
Thank you. I'm glad, I'm no longer concerned about the trees because you're on the program that I wanted to be on, so that's good. And I'm very happy about that. I would be unafraid to say that I am in favor of the epoxy lining faster. I know that everybody is pinching pennies, but I think that's a crucial one. That's my only concern. I know that we can kick it. We're not going to kick it down, but we can put the increase off until next year. But I'm kind of wary about doing that because you never know what's going to happen in the meantime. I prefer to take care of things a little at a time and be as secure as possible. So I just thank you very much for doing a great job, and most of my fears are all solved. Thank you.
Gary?
I just want to say that when we're talking about the efficiencies, we've hired a management team to handle the efficiencies. It's not the director's jobs to be entering into telling the managers how to be doing their jobs, or we don't need them. I then want to say I'm in agreement with Carl and Maggie as far as the infrastructure is concerned. And I want to say also that in my house in Laguna Niguel and Palm Springs, I'm paying $650 a month, each of them, and it has a swimming pool and a jacuzzi, which are much smaller than any of the ones that we have. And so I feel it's a real deal here.
Elsie?
And I assume that means no golf courses or?
Good assumption.
Good assumption. Okay. I've said everything I'm going to say. I just wanted to clear that up. Thank you.
All right, Christopher, we'll go to member comments. Let's see what kind of cards you have.
Our first speaker is Jenny Firmer, and after that, it will be Mary Stone.
Thank you. I'm going to read a little bit here because I just want to make sure I have the numbers right. But all the VMS reduced the proposed basic member assessment amount from 2020 to about $625 because I've crunched some numbers to $603 per month. That still represents an increase over the 2019 from up to $24.52 per month or $295 per year. That equals about a 4% increase. This also calculates the additional assessments of about $1.8 million for 2020. Still, the majority of people in United find this unacceptable. Now, everybody can pay less at other places, but the bottom line and the truth is we have a lot of money. Most people's concerns is GRF is spending the money, which is causing our assessments to go up, and then everybody's squeezed here in the mutual. A lot of people don't feel that they were consulted about the $6 million for the gates, or the 3.9 for the solar, which I don't think has had a really great return. And those are our concerns is, I feel like you guys have to penny pinch because some of the stuff that's going on in GRF, and a lot of people feel there's not good decisions being made there. I don't know what the deal with the gates was. When I moved here, I looked up the crime. It was 0.1%. I thought that was great. Director Armendariz had mentioned before, and I went ahead and calculated this to see if he was correct. 2016, 2017, and 2018 were the actual reserve expenditures, which was less than the amounts that was budgeted. And it resulted in, I think, a reserve balance, if I'm doing the numbers right, of about $6 million. Now, reserves are used to maintain, repair, replace buildings, et cetera, et cetera. They're not intended for any catastrophes. That's what insurance is for. Yeah, it would be unfortunate if we had an earthquake and things fell apart, but it's our job as residents to get that insurance, not for you guys to have to take care of that. And it seems like we have funds for infrastructure. I have earthquake insurance for myself.
Not on your building.
No, not on the building. That's insurance that you have, and I'm assuming that everybody, all the boards have made a good decision on what that insurance should be with all of the advice that you've got. So I don't worry about that. So it still leaves about 1.8, which we still have about $4,200,000 in excess reserves, and I'm just asking maybe you could take a look at that and see if somewhere we could just use that. We seem to have adequate reserves, especially according to the specialist that everybody's mentioning has done such a great job, and you feel like we've got plenty of funds everywhere else. But like I say again, I think the problem is with GRF spending, and I think as a result, going down, and it's coming here, and then it's become a problem. And that's all that I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Christopher. Mary?
Yeah, I'm looking at slide 23, and I see the handyman service has been removed. And the people who are in United who have the alterations, and a lot of them do, and a lot of the reason why they do is because we've had flippers and real estate people who think that buying into United was a good investment, so they spent a lot of money in gutting the unit, and consequently, the people who are buying it, who think they are buying into a co-op, are not really buying into a co-op. They're kind of buying more or less into a condo, because all the major services that the co-ops provide, the plumbing, the electrical, the fixtures, those things are not covered anymore. And so that's why the handyman service was a good service, because those services are no longer taken care of by the mutual, and the handyman service was good. It was abused, it needs to be revamped, but in taking it out completely, we have a lot of people who are going to be kind of left in the lurch. And I think that we need to really make sure that we have something going to keep the idea of a co-op for those people who are living in the semi-condos in United.
Our next speaker is Dick Rader, and after that is Maxine McIntosh.
Good morning, Dick Rader, 270D. Statements were made in suggesting that the VMS staff is inefficient. That's an assumption. And when I give my VMS report, I will address that. I think that being on the VMS board, I could just tell you right now that that is not correct. They are quite efficient. But anyway, a suggestion was made that, pick a number. Let's reduce the HOA, the assessment by $4. Why not $7? Why not reduce it by $8? I think that you have to recognize there's a consequence. Something has to be cut. It's going to be maintenance, repair, or service. What do you want to cut? So instead of saying, let's reduce it by $4, I think you have to say, what do you want to give up? That's what I think you should be doing. The number is meaningless. It's what you want to give up. With regard to reserve fund, I believe it's not been mentioned, but I believe that we are under certain governmental rules. Is that not correct? Whereby we have to maintain a reserve fund according to certain rules. Is that correct? Okay. So I'm going to give you a different perspective on the reserve fund. To me, it's a savings account. And right now it's looked at as a way to pay for future expenditures for repairs and maintenance that we know we're going to have to do. But on the VMS board, I get to interact with some people from Third, and they told me that they have another fund, another type of reserve fund. It's called a disaster fund. We don't have that. Their disaster fund is to cover things like earthquake, fire damages. Now, it's true that we have insurance. The insurance we have is not going to cover major disasters. Not only that, the insurance we have covers the buildings. The insurance that the individual residents have is to cover their interior things that they have within their manors. So what happens is, let's suppose, God forbid, there's a fire or an earthquake that exceeds the coverage that we have, the insurance we have in United. I look at the reserve fund as sort of like the disaster fund that Third has. It's sort of an additional insurance that we could tap. And that is one of the reasons why I wouldn't touch altering the reserve fund at all. It's a additional insurance in case of, God forbid, a major disaster.
Good afternoon. My first point I want to make is I hear too much comparing the mutuals to the condos. There's a world of difference, and maybe not everyone realizes that. The condos have always, through the years, as far as I can remember, there might have been one exception, but I don't remember it, have always had higher monthly assessments than the cooperatives. We're in United, we have a little more than 7 miles of streets with the property that goes with it for us to maintain. Third Mutual has just under 14 miles of streets with a lot more slopes than we have, and that's expensive, plus their 3-story buildings, which we do not have. We have 2 stories over garages, but we don't have 3-story buildings over garages. That makes a big difference. We can't compare the two. The mutual owns our property, and the mutual has final responsibility for our property. And that's very important to all of us in case of an emergency, especially if it's not caused by the occupant of the mutual. You're protected by mutual responsibility. All of us are. We don't want to destroy our mutual concept. You know, if we're starting to destroy that, then I would like to see our GRF destroy their shared costs. Just charge for what people are using. Don't charge all of us who don't play golf or ride horses or swim or whatever. Just charge those of us that are using it. This can work several ways, and this is a big thing to consider. We must preserve our mutual protection, our mutual liability. That all needs to be protected. Run a survey. I keep asking you to do that. Without a survey, you have to rely on what experience you've gained and personal opinion all the time. Find out how United members feel. Even if they mention something negative, something you don't like, then as a board you can say, we heard you, and this is why we can't deal with this now. Or this is why that wouldn't work for United. Might work for condominiums, but that won't work for cooperatives. We don't want to change our structure, change the protocols that have served this community the way it was meant to be served. Cortese built a middle-income community, not a resort, not a high-end resort. He built a middle-income community. And we have to all remember that. Middle income. We have our share of millionaires. We have our share of people on a really tight fixed budget. That's what you have when you're reaching for the middle class. And we shouldn't allow anyone to try to completely change that. I was very disappointed Tuesday. I have the feeling that GRF is moving toward high-end spending instead of necessity. And I hope all of you will speak against that at every chance you get. Take care of what's necessary. Don't spend on niceties and making other people's dreams come true. Thank you.
Thank you, Maxine.
I have no further requests to speak unless someone has not turned in.
Did you have any responses?
Dick Rader asked about reserve funds and what the legal requirements are. And you're required to have a fund So California Civil Code requires you to establish a reserve fund. You have to report on the fund. You have to identify your components, how long they're going to last, and how much money you're putting aside. But they do not have a requirement as far as how much money to have in reserve, right? So they go all the way up and stop short of saying you should be this % funded, or you should have this much in reserve. So that's up to the boards to decide.
Anything else? Okay, well, I'm going to make my final comment. It is our responsibility as the board of United Mutual to make sure that we preserve our mutual. The financial stability and longevity in our strategic plan, the strong reserves for future expenses, upgrading our 50-year-old infrastructure. We're asked to improve customer service and implement technology, but that all costs money. And so we are continually doing this. How can we respond to our residents' needs, which are primary for us, and yet keep our mutual strong and pay for what we need to do? It's definitely a balancing act. And I think our managing agent and particularly our finance department has done a really good job of helping us do that. So before I adjourn, in response to Director Armendariz, it is not a motion, but I would like to take a straw vote as to which of the directors feel that we should be not increasing our reserve and using reserve monies for operations. Does that kind of, nope, you want to restate it?
Incorrect. What I am recommending is to lower the assessment amount for 2020 by $12, we'll say. And that would reduce the monthly assessment for all costs to just a $12 increase. And that, I'm basing it on the fact that we have accumulated over $6 million in additional funds in the reserves, and reducing the monthly assessment by $12.50, we'll say, only reduces the contribution by $950,000. We will still be contributing $10 million to reserves. We will not be cutting any expenditures planned out of reserves. What it means that our projected reserves next year, instead of being, and I would be willing to bet you the reserves are going to be higher next year than what they projected, but instead of being, let's say, $16,800,000, maybe they're only $16 million. So that's what I'm proposing, reducing the contribution for reserves instead of increasing them by $4, reducing them by $8.50, a net effect of $12.50 from your current assessment amount. Now, have I explained that adequately? Does anybody have any questions on what I'm saying?
Again,
I'll
it's
answer any
using our
questions you have.
reserves for our operating budget instead of,
I'm asking to, we reduce the contribution that we'll make for 2020. We'll have a chance to look at this again next year. We're still going to be contributing $11 million.
Take $12 out of what, though?
The reserve contribution for 2020.
but the reserve
It
contribution
won't
for
affect-
220 is $5.
No, right, no, it's not. I'm talking about the reserve.
Chris can bring up the
for
slides so that
components.
everybody
Right.
knows where we're at before voting.
If you look at page 16.
Slide 16,
There.
Okay.
the current contribution to reserve is
On page 8 of
$152.02.
25, line item 28, reserve fund. Presently, you have a $4.02 increase. So I'm saying, instead of $152.02, which is a $4 increase, let's reduce that $148 down to $139.50, okay? That's a decrease of $9.50. The net effect is $9.50 plus $4.02, okay?
Yes, so what
Can I
we're
explain any
doing
clearer than
is
that?
not putting money into reserves, but taking money out of reserves
No,
to cover
no,
our
you're not taking money
operations.
out of reserves, okay? You're taking it out of the accumulated funds that are available.
That's part of, its reserves.
Okay, I'm talking about reducing the contribution for next year.
I think you need to keep it simple as far as reducing the reserve contribution, because the
Yeah.
reserve plan starts with a funding balance that accounts for any prior year funding.
Right. That's in our reserves.
So just simplify it, not as far as you're
Yeah.
contributing this amount and you're proposing $12.50 lower than that.
Yeah, right, correct.
All right,
The contribution would be 139.50 instead of 148.
Be reducing that amount.
Correct, Betty?
So reducing the balance.
That's what
No.
I heard, but
We're
did
reducing
you,
the contribution.
did you also recommend a reduction in the contingency fund?
Oh, I'll leave that alone, the way
I didn't
it
know
is.
how you got to the 1250.
1250, I just took that from the total assessment, that's all. I said, let's split the difference in your total
Okay, so
assessment. The increase in your total assessment.
152.02 down to 139.50,
Yes,
that's 1252.
yeah, right. You understand it, right, Betty?
reserve plan, that's going to put us
You understand it,
in
right?
jeopardy.
Okay, they understand,
That-
they understand it,
It's about $950,000.
right, that's what I said,
Right.
yeah. So instead of contributing 11,535,000, you only contributed 10,600,000.
Okay, so we've got the
Is
numbers.
that any clearer?
Yeah.
Okay. And according, again, to the reserve study, that would put us in jeopardy, the red.
Put us in the red?
On-
All right,
on- On that measure
Right.
of the risk for special assessment, using that measure, yes.
Right. All right, all those in support of, no, we're just doing a straw vote. All of those in favor? No. All of those in favor? All of those in favor of asking finance to, and VMS to put in manual suggestion considering the reserves, please raise your hand.
Can we have comments?
No,
No.
Do you want to put your hand up or not? All right. All those opposed? All right, it doesn't pass.
Can I have some comment on that?
No, come on.
Yeah, all right. Our next meeting, of course, is this, for this, will be Tuesday, September 10th, and that's when we will actually vote on it. We will look at any adjustments that have been made. There have been suggestions of things where we might be able to cut, et cetera. Yes, Betty?
But before we close, I just wanted to thank my staff, because they
Oh,
sit
yeah.
here quietly the whole time, and I didn't get an opportunity. But Chris Swanson and Jose Campos, Chris is our analyst who just makes these meetings happen and gets everything to you. And Jose obviously is behind all the numbers, and his team of analysts have worked all summer long. So just want to thank them for all the work. It's been
Not
tireless.
just summer, I'm sure they started in the spring.
Spring, yes.
They've been doing quite a bit. All right, but remember, we have our regular board meeting next Tuesday here in the boardroom at 9:30. And then our September meeting, September 10th, is when we will vote on the final version of the budget. All right, this meeting is adjourned.
We won't be either one.